Welcome to part 7. There's something very important that we need to discuss at the end of this module. Now, in Spanish, they use this wasing and wearing a lot more than we do in English. So I'm talking now about the line past that we've just been through. So it's very important to understand how this works. One of the easiest ways is to consider it as a dot and as a line. So here we have a dot, which would be the simple past, and a line, which would be the line past. Now, the dot, the simple past, is something that happens in that exact moment. So it has a start and it has an end. For example, I spoke, I found out, I tried, I ate. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. In English, we can say something like, I tried to do it. And that can mean that I tried to do it in that very moment, or it can mean I tried to do it every day. I tried to do it all the time. I tried to do it last year. I tried to do it for 20 years. So in English, it can mean both, that I tried to do it in that very specific moment. I tried and I couldn't do it. Or it can mean that I was trying consistently over and over again. Now, in Spanish, you can't do that. So we need to make a very clear distinction about whether we tried in that moment, in which case we would use the simple past, or whether we tried continuously all the time for 10 years, whatever, and that would be the line past. You see, in English, we don't have to make that distinction. If we go back here, I tried to do it, it can mean I tried to do it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon yesterday and I couldn't. Or it can mean I tried to do it for 20 years. Now, we use in both cases, I tried. In English, it doesn't change, but in Spanish, it does change. So if we mean that I tried to do it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I wasn't able to do it, then we would use the simple past, the dot, because it has a very specific start and an end. If, however, we're saying I tried to do it all day yesterday, I tried to do it for 10 years and I couldn't, then that's more of a continuous line, and we would have to use then the line past. So you see how in Spanish they make a distinction and in English we don't. So this is a concept that we're going to have to practice and get used to doing in Spanish. And it's going to feel a little bit strange at first because it's something we don't do in English. Here are some more examples to help you understand this. Look at this sentence here. We have, I tried it at 3 p.m. Now this is definitely a dot, right? Because it's something very specific. I tried it at 3 p.m. So in Spanish, we would use the simple past. If we were to say, I tried it every day, that is something continuous. So we have the line past in Spanish. So we have to switch in Spanish. But if you look at it closely in English, we're having I tried here, I tried it at 3 p.m., but also I tried it every day. So in English, we don't switch. But in Spanish, yes, we do. Because I tried it at 3 p.m. is a dot, something specific, start, end, but I tried it every day is a line. So therefore, we would have to use the line past in Spanish. Look at this next one. You could say, I spoke at the conference. Well, that is a dot. I spoke at the conference, the end. So in Spanish, we would use the simple past for here, I spoke. But if we were saying, I spoke to him all the time, well, in Spanish, now they consider that a line. It's something continuous. I spoke to him all the time. It's a continuous line. So therefore, we would use the line past. But again, notice in English how we have I spoke and I spoke. In English, we didn't make a differentiation between them, but in Spanish, we must. Here's another one. I worked for 1 hour. So here we have a dot. I worked for 1 hour, so we would use the simple past. But if we were to say, I worked there for 20 years, now we have a more continuous line in Spanish. But again, notice in English we have I worked and I worked. So this is something, a concept that we need to be aware of when speaking Spanish because it works a little bit differently to what we're used to in English. So to summarize, in Spanish we have the simple past, which is specific. It's a dot, a start and an end. Or we also have the line past, which is more continuous. Now, as you can see, in Spanish they make a very clear distinction between the dot and the line, and in English we don't do that. So we'll do a lot more practice of this in future lessons, and you'll find that you start to get very used to this idea of whether something in the past was a dot or something in the past was a line. And from that point, you'll then know in Spanish whether you should use the simple past dot or the line past.